My son looked at me with eyes full of something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. He stood in the doorway, his hand gripping the edge of the wall as if the house itself were holding him back. Behind him, the late afternoon light spilled across the floor, golden and soft, painting the room I had called home for more than 40 years. A half-packed suitcase sat on my bed. My blouses, folded neatly, waited to be taken somewhere unfamiliar. The ticking of the clock on the mantel filled the silence, steady, indifferent, cruel. He cleared his throat once before speaking. "Mom, it's for your own good." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "You'll be taken care of there. You'll have people around you. It'll be better." Better? I wondered what better meant. Better than the home where I raised him? Better than the kitchen where I made his birthday cakes, where I waited for him to come home from his first heartbreak, where I stayed up through nights of fever and worry. I wanted to ask those questions, but the words got stuck somewhere deep in my chest, behind years of swallowed pain and quiet pride. Instead, I just nodded. He took it as understanding. It wasn't. It was surrender. I watched him walk through the hallway, glancing nervously at the walls lined with photographs. Our family frozen in happier moments. There he was at 6 years old, grinning with 2 missing teeth. At 16, awkward and shy. At 25, confident and bright-eyed. He didn't look at them long. Maybe they reminded him of promises he no longer kept. I turned back to my suitcase, folding the last blouse slowly, smoothing each wrinkle with the palm of my hand. That small act, quiet, deliberate, was the only control I had left. I thought about how motherhood teaches you to endure, to keep your pain tucked away behind soft smiles. Silence becomes your armor, your language of survival. The house felt heavier with every breath. The walls seemed to lean in, listening. Every corner held echoes of the life I'd built. The laughter from long ago birthdays, the scent of Sunday dinners, the faint sound of tiny shoes running down the hall. When he came back to the doorway, he looked smaller somehow, like a boy again. "Are you ready, Mom?" Ready. As if anyone could ever be ready to leave behind everything that made them who they are. I picked up my suitcase and looked around one last time. The couch with the frayed corner. The window where I watched him take his first steps in the garden. I wanted to memorize it all, every imperfection that felt like love. My voice came out soft, almost a whisper. "Yes, I'm ready." If you love emotional stories like this, about family, love, and life's hardest lessons, please subscribe right now. I share my heart with you, just like I am today. He took the suitcase from my hands, careful not to meet my eyes. We walked toward the front door together. Each step felt like leaving a piece of myself behind. The woman I was, the mother I'd been, the home that had sheltered every version of me. At the threshold, I turned the key one last time. The sound of the lock clicking echoed through the empty house like a heartbeat slowing down. And as the door closed behind me, the silence that followed was the sound of an era ending. The car ride was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until breathing feels like effort. My suitcase rested at my feet, the handle tilted toward me like a question I didn't know how to answer. My son kept his eyes on the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, white-knuckled, restless. I watched him from the corner of my eye, tracing the lines of the boy I used to know, hidden beneath the man he'd become. The curve of his jaw, the faint crease in his forehead, all so familiar, yet distant. Outside, the world passed in blurred colors, trees bending in the wind, small houses flickering by like half-remembered dreams. The rhythm of the tires on the pavement filled the space between us. I wanted to say something. Anything. Maybe ask him if he remembered how I used to sing to him during long car rides, how he'd press his face against the window and count clouds. But the words stayed trapped behind my ribs. What good were memories now? Instead, I just said softly, "It's a nice day." He nodded, eyes fixed ahead. "Yeah, it is." That was all. When we finally turned down the long road to the nursing home, the air seemed to change, too still, too careful. The building came into view. Pale brick walls, white curtains, a small garden out front with perfectly trimmed hedges. It looked clean, organized, lifeless. My son parked and turned off the engine. He stayed in the car for a moment, staring at the dashboard like it held answers he couldn't find. Then he whispered, "You'll be happy here, Mom. You'll have people around you. They'll take good care of you. I smiled, because that's what mothers do when their children lie to make themselves feel better. I know, dear, I said gently. I know. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and artificial flowers. The walls were covered with paintings of meadows that no one would ever visit. A nurse greeted us, young, kind-eyed, and professional. She spoke softly, as if trying not to disturb the air of sadness that clung to every corridor. This will be your room, she said, opening a door to a small space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out on the garden. Lunch is at noon. You'll meet the others soon. The bedspread was crisp, white untouched. I ran my hand over it and felt a strange emptiness. The kind that comes when life is reduced to essentials. My son placed my suitcase by the wall. He glanced around the room pretending to check things, but I could tell he was just avoiding my eyes. Well, he said finally, I'll come visit soon. Maybe this weekend. I nodded. Of course. We both knew he wouldn't. He hugged me quickly, awkwardly. His cologne smelled like something expensive, sharp and unfamiliar. When he stepped back, he smiled, small, polite, practiced. Then he was gone. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway until there was only silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared out the window. The garden outside was neat and tidy, but every flower seemed to be leaning toward the sunlight that never quite reached them. I caught my reflection in the glass, my face lined and soft, eyes still searching for the boy who used to run to me when he was scared. When did I start looking like someone who could be left behind? I whispered to no one. A faint laughter drifted in from the hallway. Nurses chatting, someone humming. Life continued around me, indifferent. For a long while, I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, trying to feel the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't anger. It was something quieter, heavier, like grief without tears. When the nurse returned with a tray of tea and cookies, I thanked her politely, as though I hadn't just said goodbye to everything I'd ever known. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me filled the room. It wasn't the noise that kept me awake. It was the absence of everything else. No clock ticking, no creak of the old floorboards, no heartbeat of a home that once held love. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Be happy, my son." It was easier to wish him happiness than to admit how much I'd lost. The days that followed blurred together. Quiet mornings, soft voices, the slow rhythm of routine. But memories have a way of breaking through silence. They come uninvited, like sunlight slipping through curtains. One afternoon, I sat by the window, watching the wind move through the trees outside. The sound reminded me of another time, a younger version of me, and a little boy who believed I could fix anything. I was 27 when I first held him in my arms. So small, so fragile. His fingers wrapped around mine like I was the whole world. I remember the smell of baby powder and warm milk, the way he'd stop crying the moment I sang. The world was simple then, just me, him, and the promise that love would be enough. When his father left, I didn't cry. I just went to work, mornings at the diner, evenings sewing clothes for neighbors, nights studying his sleeping face and whispering, "We'll be okay, my love." There was never much money, but we always had laughter. I used to make pancakes in funny shapes, animals, stars, anything to make him giggle. His giggle. That was my reward for every tired morning. He grew fast, too fast. I can still see him, 6 years old, wobbling on his bike in front of the house. His little knees scraped, his eyes full of tears. "Don't let go, Mom," he shouted. I promised I wouldn't. But I did. Because mothers have to let go, even when it hurts. He fell, of course. Cried for a second, then looked up at me. "You said you wouldn't let go." "I didn't," I smiled. "You just didn't notice you were already flying." He laughed through his tears. That's the moment I knew he'd be strong enough to face the world. Years later, I was still sewing late into the night. My fingers ached, but every stitch meant new shoes for him, school trips he could join, a little dignity for a boy who deserved the world. When he was 10, I walked miles in the snow to watch him in a school play. He was a tree, just a tree, standing on the far side of the stage with his little paper leaves shaking. But when he spotted me in the crowd, his smile outshone everyone else. Afterward, he ran into my arms. Did you see me, Mom? I saw the best tree on that stage, I said. Then came the teenage years. He started pulling away, little by little. Late nights, closed doors, muffled music. I told myself it was normal. All boys drift from their mothers eventually. But sometimes, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him sigh in the dark. He was still my boy. He just didn't know how to say it anymore. One night, he came home late, eyes red, shoulders heavy. I didn't ask questions. I just made tea and waited. After a long silence, he said, "She broke up with me, Mom." I remember sitting beside him, our hands wrapped around the same cup of tea. "Then she wasn't the one," I said softly. "The right one won't make you cry." He laughed through his tears. "You always know what to say." That night, I tucked him in like I did when he was little, brushing his hair off his forehead. He was nearly 18, taller than me, but in that moment he looked like the same boy who once cried over scraped knees. His graduation day was one of the brightest days of my life. I wore the same blue dress I'd mended a dozen times, pretending it was new. The sun was warm, the crowd loud. And when he walked across that stage, I thought my heart might burst. He found me afterward, hugged me tight, and whispered, "I'll take care of you one day, Mom. You won't have to work again." I laughed and said, "Just call me sometimes. That's all I need." He promised. And in that moment, I believed him. But life moves fast. Work, marriage, children of his own. All the things that fill a life and push old promises to the corners of memory. The calls became fewer. The visits shorter. And yet every time I saw him, I still saw that little boy. The one who needed me, who trusted me completely. A knock on my nursing home door pulled me back to the present. It was a nurse, smiling gently. "Would you like to come outside, Mrs. Turner? It's a nice day." I nodded, tucking a photo into my sweater pocket, one of him at 6 years old, grinning through missing teeth. Outside, I found a quiet bench beneath a maple tree. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm against my skin. I took out the photo and studied it. "I did my best," I whispered to it. "I hope you know that." It's strange how motherhood works. You spend years teaching your child to walk away, and then spend the rest of your life wishing they'd come back. I never wanted him to be perfect. I only wanted him to remember the sound of my voice when I told him I loved him. I closed my eyes and let the memories play. All the laughter, all the noise, all the beautiful chaos of raising a boy alone. It felt like watching the film of a life that used to be mine. And when I opened my eyes again, the world outside seemed softer somehow. The trees swayed, the light danced across the garden, and I thought, if I could do it all over again, I'd still choose the same life, the same love. Because even now, sitting in this quiet place, I wouldn't trade a single sleepless night, a single worry, or a single moment of joy. They say love fades with time. But I've lived long enough to know, a mother's love doesn't fade. It lingers, like sunlight on old photographs, warm, constant, waiting to be remembered. Days in the nursing home passed like pages in a book I didn't remember choosing to read. Morning began with the same gentle knock on the door, the same polite greeting. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner. Time for breakfast." The voices were kind, but not familiar. The faces smiled, but not with the warmth of someone who truly knew me. I learned the rhythm of this new life quickly. Meals at 8, medication at 10, television at noon, silence by evening. Everything predictable, everything careful. It was comfort wrapped in emptiness. The air always smelled faintly of disinfectant and artificial lavender. The nurses tried to make it homely. Fresh flowers on the tables, pastel curtains, framed paintings of fields and sunshine. But none of it could replace the sound of belonging. When I first arrived, I told myself this was temporary. That he'd visit soon. That maybe we'd laugh about it one day. I'd wake early and wait by the window, fixing my hair, smoothing my blouse, just in case he came by unannounced. He never did. Weeks turned into months. The waiting turned into routine, then into habit, then into quiet acceptance. There were others like me. Faces marked by years, hearts heavy with stories that no one asked to hear. We shared polite nods in the hallway, traded small smiles over cups of tea. Some talked about children who called every week. Others spoke of families that forgot them long ago. There was Mrs. O'Hara, who still sat 2 places at her table each morning, waiting for a husband who'd passed a decade ago, and Mr. Lewis, who spent his afternoons watching the garden, whispering to the flowers as if they could remember him. I began to understand that loneliness wasn't the absence of people, it was the absence of being needed. At home, even when I was tired, there had always been purpose. A meal to cook, a shirt to iron, a voice to answer. Here the quiet had weight. It pressed against the walls, against my chest. Sometimes it felt like the air itself forgot to breathe. Every night, I'd listen to the soft hum of the lights above, the distant sounds of nurses moving through the corridor. I'd reach for the photo of my son on the nightstand, the same one from his graduation day, and whisper, "How's your day, dear?" I'd answer myself, too. Mine was fine, just a bit quiet. One afternoon, a nurse brought me a letter from my old neighbor, Margaret. She wrote about the street I used to live on, how the roses in my garden had grown wild, how the swing I built for my son was still there, swaying in the wind. Her words painted a picture that was both comforting and cruel. I imagined the house, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, the smell of coffee in the morning. It wasn't the same anymore, but in my heart, it still felt like mine. Sometimes new residents would arrive, clutching suitcases in confusion, just like I had. I'd smile at them and say, "It gets easier." I wasn't sure if it really did, but saying it made the days feel a little lighter. The nurses were good to us. They tried to fill the silence with kindness. But kindness isn't the same as love. Love is messy, imperfect, unpredictable. Here everything was orderly, predictable, safe. I missed the chaos, the burnt toast, the phone ringing off the hook, the sound of my son's laughter echoing from the hallway. I missed the feeling of being someone's home. One evening, as I sat by the window, I watched a young couple in the garden below. They were visiting someone, an older man in a wheelchair. The young woman knelt beside him, feeding him bits of cake, laughing softly. I didn't know them, but the sight of them hurt in a way I couldn't explain. It reminded me of what time takes from us. Not just youth, but relevance. You spend your whole life loving people, and one day you realize love doesn't always have a return address. I closed my eyes and breathed in slowly. It wasn't cruel, I told myself. It's just empty. That's the thing about loneliness. It doesn't roar. It whispers. It hums softly in the background of every day, until you forget what silence used to sound like. But even in that emptiness, there were small moments that kept me going. The nurse who brushed my hair gently, the way the morning light spilled across the floor, the laughter from the television in the lounge. Tiny reminders that life still existed around me, even if I was no longer at its center. Still, every night before I slept, I turned toward the photo again. "Good night, my boy," I whispered. "Be kind to yourself. Don't work too hard. Remember to eat." The words came naturally, like breathing. Habits formed over a lifetime of loving someone who no longer listened. But saying them made me feel human again. And in those quiet hours when the world had gone still, I found a strange comfort in my own voice. Fragile, yes, but still mine. Because even when the world forgets you, memory keeps you alive. It happens slowly, the shift from sadness to stillness, from waiting to simply being. Somewhere between sunrise and sunset, I stopped counting the days since he last called. One morning, while I was sitting in the common room, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mind if I sit here?" I looked up to see a young volunteer, maybe 19, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. His name was Daniel. He visited every Tuesday, helping the nurses, reading to residents, sometimes just listening. There was something gentle about him, something familiar. Maybe it was the way he spoke, respectful, patient, unhurried, like the world hadn't taught him to rush yet. We started talking. At first, it was small things, the weather, his studies, the books he liked. But over time, he began asking questions about me, about my past, my family, my son. "Do they visit often?" he asked one afternoon, as we watered the plants by the window. I smiled and said what I always said. "They're busy." He nodded, pretending to accept that, though his eyes lingered on me a moment longer, full of quiet understanding. Daniel reminded me of my son. The way he listened, the way he laughed with his whole face. But unlike my son, he stayed. Every week, without fail, he came. There was comfort in that routine. A soft voice asking, "How are you today, Mrs. Turner?" And every time I found myself answering a little more honestly. I told him stories about how I met his father, how I used to dance barefoot in the kitchen when no one was watching, how love can be both anchor and storm. He listened like my words mattered. And for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. One afternoon, as he helped me to the garden, he said, "You've got a strength about you, the kind that doesn't fade with age." I laughed softly. "Strength, dear? I think you're mistaking it for stubbornness." He grinned. "Maybe. But sometimes that's the same thing." That night I thought about what he said. Strength. Had I really been strong, or had I just endured? There's a difference. Endurance is survival. Strength is choice. And that night I made a choice. I would stop waiting for my son's apology. Stop replaying what I couldn't change. Stop living in the space between hope and hurt. Instead, I would live, quietly, deliberately, for myself. So I began writing again. Small things at first. Notes. Memories. Fragments of a life scattered like puzzle pieces. Some days, I wrote letters I'd never send. To my son. To my younger self. To the woman who once believed she was only as valuable as what she gave. In those pages, I found freedom. I wrote not to be heard, but to remember that my voice still existed. The others in the home started to notice. Mrs. O'Hara would knock on my door, asking if I could help her write a letter to her granddaughter. Mr. Lewis began sitting beside me in the afternoons, sharing stories from his Navy days. I listened to them, comforted them, laughed with them. The quiet that once felt like punishment became something else, peace. One day, the head nurse asked if I would help new residents settle in. "You have a calming presence," she said. I smiled. Maybe I just understand what they're feeling. It was strange, in a beautiful way, finding purpose in a place I once thought would be my ending. I began waking earlier, making my bed, opening the curtains wide to let the sunlight in. The mornings no longer felt heavy. And every Tuesday, Daniel would come, always with a new story, a new joke, a new flower from the garden. He once said, "You've taught me more about life than any book ever could." I told him, "That's because life isn't written. It's lived and sometimes survived." That evening after he left, I sat by the window watching the sunset melt across the sky. The colors shifted from gold to rose to violet, soft, fleeting, perfect. For years, I had waited for someone to save me. Now I understood. Salvation was never coming from outside. It was something you build quietly, one small act of grace at a time. The place that once felt like a cage had become a refuge. The loneliness had turned into stillness, and the stillness had turned into strength. As the sky dimmed, I whispered to the fading light, "I'm okay." And for the first time, I truly meant it. 2 years passed almost without me noticing. Seasons came and went, each one softening the ache a little more. The pain had dulled into something quieter, an ache I'd learned to live beside rather than fight against. Then one morning, the phone on the nightstand rang. It startled me. Hardly anyone ever called. I picked up, expecting a nurse or a wrong number. But then I heard it, his voice. "Mom, it's me." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The years of silence folded into that single second, pressing against my throat. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "I know it's been a while." I didn't say anything. I let him talk. I just wanted to hear your voice," he continued, fumbling over his words. I should have called sooner. Things got complicated." Complicated. Such a small word for such a deep wound. He hesitated. "Mom, I lost the business. We're losing the house too. I don't even know what to do anymore." His voice cracked at the end. My son, the man who once stood tall and sure of everything, sounded small. Like the boy who used to call me from his room when the thunder scared him. For a moment, I felt the old instinct rising. The mother's need to protect, to fix, to comfort. But I stayed quiet, letting the truth hang between us. "I don't know who else to call," he said finally. "I just needed to talk to you." The silence that followed wasn't angry or awkward. It was full of everything that had been unsaid for years. I'm glad you called, I said softly. He exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and shame. I'm so sorry, Mom. Those words, simple, trembling, broke something open inside me. But not in the way he expected. It wasn't pain this time. It was something gentler. I know, I said. Come visit when you can. The next week he came. I saw him from my window, standing outside the entrance, hesitant, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. There was no confident stride, no practiced smile, just a man who'd finally run out of armor. When he walked into my room, time seemed to hesitate. He looked older, tired eyes, lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. Life had humbled him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "You look good, Mom." I smiled faintly. "And you look like you could use a meal." That made him laugh just a little. The sound cracked through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. He sat beside me, and we talked. Really talked. For the first time in years, there were no polite words, no pretending. He told me about the business that had collapsed, the debts that piled up, the nights he couldn't sleep. "I thought I had it all figured out," he said quietly. "I thought money, success, the house, they'd make everything right. But when it all disappeared, I realized how empty it all was." He looked at me, guilt heavy in his eyes. "And I realized how much I'd taken you for granted." I didn't scold him. I didn't say, "You should have known." Instead, I said, "Sometimes life has to take everything away before it teaches us what really matters." He dropped his head into his hands and cried, silent, shaking tears that years of pride had buried. I reached out, resting my hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," I said softly. "You don't have to be strong right now." Later, when he finally looked up, there was a question in his eyes. "Do you hate me for what I did?" I thought about that for a long moment. About the loneliness, the silence, the ache of waiting. Then I shook my head. "No. I could never hate you. You're my son." The words came out calm, not because the hurt had vanished, but because it no longer controlled me. He nodded slowly, wiping his face. "You're stronger than I ever realized." I smiled faintly. "No. I just had a lot of practice." Before he left that day, he turned at the door. "Can I visit again?" I nodded. "I'd like that." After he was gone, I sat for a long time, staring at the space he'd just occupied. The air still carried the faint trace of his cologne, the same scent he'd worn the day he left me here. But it didn't sting anymore. Life in its strange way had brought him back, different, broken, but human again. Sometimes I think the universe waits until we're humble enough to listen before it sends us the lessons we refuse to learn. That night, as the lights dimmed, I whispered to the quiet room, "Thank you for calling, my boy. That's all I ever wanted." He came again the following week. This time, there was no hesitation in his step, just a quiet resolve, like a man walking towards something he should have faced long ago. When he entered my room, I was sitting by the window, the afternoon light spilling across my lap. I smiled when I saw him, but he didn't smile back. His eyes were red, tired, heavy with words he hadn't yet spoken. He closed the door softly and stood for a moment, hands trembling slightly. "Mom," he said, "there's something I need to say." I didn't move, just looked at him, waiting. He sank into the chair beside me and took a deep breath. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he began. "When I brought you here, I told myself it was because I wanted you to be cared for. But the truth is, I didn't want to deal with it. With you getting older. With the responsibility." His voice cracked. "I was selfish. I was scared. You were becoming a reminder that time moves forward, and I didn't want to face it. So I told myself it was for your own good, when really, it was for mine." I listened quietly, my hands resting on the armrest, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. He went on, his words spilling faster now, years of guilt rushing out all at once. "I'd walk past your room at night and think about calling, but I couldn't. Every time I did, I heard your voice in my head, and it just reminded me of what I'd done. I kept convincing myself that you were fine, that you'd adjusted. I even told my wife you were happy here. But deep down, I knew I'd abandoned you." He looked up then, eyes pleading. "How do I fix that, Mom? How do I make up for it?" I took a long breath. The air between us was thick with sorrow, but not anger. I'd already let that go. You can't fix the past, I said softly. You can only live differently from now on. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said, my voice steady. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about peace. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as quiet tears slipped down his face. In that moment, I saw not the man who had left me here, but the boy who once cried when he thought he'd disappointed me. The same child I'd held through every storm. The same soul I'd loved long before he knew what love was. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and placed it over his. His fingers closed around mine instantly, like muscle memory. Do you remember, I said softly, when you fell off your bike and scraped your knees? He nodded through his tears. You came running to me, crying that I'd let go. But I didn't. You were already flying, and you didn't realize it. I paused. You fell again, my son. But this time, I'm not here to catch you. I'm here to remind you that you can stand up. He looked at me, confused, and then something in his face softened. Recognition, relief, maybe both. I missed you, he whispered. I know, I said. And I missed you too. We sat there for a long time, no words, just the sound of the wind brushing against the window. It wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore. It was full of understanding, of love rediscovered, of forgiveness that needed no explanation. He squeezed my hand gently. I'll come again. Not just to visit, but to be here, with you. For as long as you'll let me. I smiled. I'll always let you. As the afternoon light faded, I studied his face, the new lines, the softened edges. Life had changed him, but maybe that was how it had to be. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves before we learn how to come home. He stood to leave, pausing by the door. You've always been stronger than me, he said quietly. I shook my head. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and choosing to love anyway. He smiled then, a real one, small but full of life. I'll see you soon, Mom. When the door closed behind him, I sat there for a while, my heart strangely light. The years of waiting, the ache of being forgotten, they didn't vanish, but they no longer ruled me. Life had given me something rarer than revenge. It had given me closure. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in proving someone wrong. It's in forgiving them, and realizing you've healed far beyond what their apology can reach. After that day, things changed. Quietly, steadily, like morning light creeping across a dark room. My son began visiting often. Not out of guilt anymore, but because he wanted to. At first, he'd come once a week, bringing small things he thought I'd like. My favorite lemon cookies, a book of poems, a shawl he said reminded him of me. Then as the weeks passed, he stayed longer. He'd sit by my side while I knitted, sometimes saying nothing at all. And that silence felt warm again. The kind that lives between two people who finally understand each other. He started helping around the nursing home, too, fixing loose hinges, tending the garden with Daniel and the other volunteers. I'd watch him from my window as he worked quietly, sleeves rolled up, sunlight on his face. It was as if he was trying to rebuild not just the broken parts of our relationship, but himself. One afternoon, as we sat under the maple tree, he said, I used to think strength meant doing everything alone. Now I know it's the opposite. I smiled. Took you long enough to figure that out. He laughed softly, a sound that filled the air like music. He started bringing his children to visit. The first time they came, they ran up to me shyly, clutching wildflowers from the garden. Grandma, the little one said, Dad says you tell the best stories. I looked at my son, who smiled sheepishly. He's right, I said. But I charge for them in hugs. Their laughter echoed across the courtyard, and for the first time in years, I felt what I thought I'd lost, family. Sometimes he would take me home for the weekend. Walking through my old front door again felt like stepping into a dream. The scent of the wooden floors, the creak of the staircase, it was all there, waiting patiently for me. We'd cook together, the way we used to when he was young. He'd chop vegetables awkwardly, still too heavy-handed with the knife. Still can't cut straight. I'd tease. And he'd grin. That's why I've got you to fix it, Mom. In those small moments, I realized forgiveness had done more than heal me. It had changed him too. He was gentler now, humbler. His words carried gratitude where pride used to live. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from my old porch, he turned to me and said, "I don't know how you forgave me." I took his hand in mine and said, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the fading light. "You deserve peace, Mom." I smiled. "I already have it." Back at the nursing home, I began noticing beauty in the simplest things again. The nurse's laughter, the sound of birds at dawn, the way the afternoon sun painted the floor in gold. The walls no longer felt like confinement. They were shelter now, a space where my story had come full circle. I spent my evenings knitting by the window, humming to myself, the air around me calm and alive. The woman who once arrived here broken had found something unexpected: contentment. Because peace isn't found in what you get back from others. It's found in the moment you stop needing their apology to move forward. That night, as I turned off the lamp, I whispered a quiet thank you. To life, to time, to love that somehow always finds its way home. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something simple and beautiful. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. They say time heals all wounds, but that's not entirely true. Time doesn't erase pain. It just teaches the heart how to carry it differently. Mine had carried a lot. Regret, love, silence. But in the end, what remained was something purer. Understanding. I often sit by my window in the evenings, watching the sky shift colors, thinking about how everything in life eventually comes full circle. The boy I once held in my arms had become the man who held my hand again. Not out of duty this time, but out of love reborn through humility. When people hear talk about forgiveness, they imagine it as an act of mercy toward someone else. But I've learned it's really an act of mercy toward yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never hurt. It means the hurt no longer controls you. If I could speak to every mother who has felt forgotten, every heart that has been left behind, I would tell them this. You are more than your pain. You are the sum of every gentle act you've ever given, every smile you've inspired, every ounce of love you poured into others. None of it is wasted, even when it feels unseen. When my son visits now, we don't talk about the past. We don't need to. Our silence says everything. It says, "I'm sorry, I forgive you, I still love you." We've learned that sometimes healing isn't in grand apologies or perfect endings. It's in showing up, over and over, even when it's hard. The garden outside my window is in full bloom now. The same maple tree that once watched me through my loneliest days stands proud and steady, its branches heavy with life. I like to think we've grown together, both of us weathered by time yet still standing, still reaching toward the light. If you still have someone who loves you, don't wait until it's too late to show them that you care. Call them, visit them, sit beside them, even in silence. Because one day, the chance to say I love you will only exist as a whisper in your memory. A heart doesn't need a mansion. It just needs presence. It needs someone to sit beside it, to listen, to remember. I've lived long enough to know that life rarely gives us what we expect, but sometimes it gives us what we need. My son thought putting me here was for my own good. Maybe in a way he was right. Because this is where I learned that love, when broken and rebuilt, can become even stronger. If stories like this touch your heart, if they remind you of love, loss, and the power of forgiveness, please subscribe. I share my heart here, one story at a time, hoping someone out there remembers what truly matters.